If you could go back in time and witness one of the events recorded in the Bible, what would you choose? And I don't know if I could narrow it down to one myself, but near the top of my list of things I would want to see would be the transfiguration of Christ. And it's interesting, that's that passage that was just read for us by Ron. That's what Peter is referring to, right? When he says we've not followed cunningly devised fables, right? He's saying this occasion where Jesus was transformed. This isn't just some made-up story to teach some nice moral ideas. He's telling us this really happened. He was an eyewitness of this happening. Again, this must have been an amazing sight to see when Jesus was transfigured on that mountain. Jesus did many signs and miracles to show that God was with him, that God confirmed his ministry, his teaching and preaching. Jesus cast out demons. He healed people who had diseases and were physically disabled. He walked on water. He miraculously fed thousands of people with little food. And he did all these things and others so people could trust that he is the Son of God. And again, the things that he said were true, that he was truly sent by God the Father. If you have a Bible, please open it with me to Matthew chapter 17. Matthew chapter 17, and tonight we're going to consider, again, another miracle regarding Christ. Again, that's the transfiguration. In Matthew 17, we're going to focus on the metamorphosis, the appearance of Moses and Elijah, the cloud, and then lastly, the Father's words, "Hear him." So the transfiguration of Jesus is unique. It's certainly not a typical miracle, but it is a miracle nonetheless. When the Bible uses the word miracle to describe something that is miraculous, it's talking about something which is contrary to the natural order of things. And when we read the Bible, it's important that we use biblical ideas and biblical definitions and trying to understand it, because sometimes people will say, oh, a baby was born, that's a miracle. And I understand what that person is saying. I think most of us understand. It's a wonderful thing. It's a great blessing. But again, if we're going to talk about things using Bible words, it's not a miracle. I mean, that's a natural, everyday thing. Babies are born every minute of every day. So we're not trying to downplay that it's a wonderful thing. It's just not a miracle as the Bible uses that word. Or someone might be in the hospital and not feeling well, and Christians or loved ones pray for that individual to recover. And time goes by, and they take their medicine, and they're following instructions and getting rest, and they recover. Again, that's a wonderful thing, but again, that's not a miracle. That's just the natural process of things and how the body can heal over time. So again, a miracle is something which is against the natural order of things. It contradicts nature. Again, for example, Jesus instantly healing someone of paralysis, and that man getting up and walking home, that's a miracle. Again, that doesn't happen when someone legitimately has paralysis. I mean, even today with modern medicine, we can't do that. And I have a Bible dictionary, and it gives, I think, a more thorough explanation or definition of a miracle. And it says, and I quote, "An event that defies common expectation of behavior and subsequently is attributed to a superhuman agent. An occurrence that demonstrates God's involvement in the course of human affairs," end quote. And so when we look at Matthew 17 tonight, again, I encourage you to open your Bible. I'll be reading from Matthew 17. The word miracle is not found here. But again, this transfiguration of Christ, it is a miracle. It is something which would go against common expectation, or just, again, the natural process of things. Jesus did not appear luminous and glorious all the time. This was something special. This was something unique. And when we think about what we're going to read here in Matthew 17, this is recorded in the Synoptic Gospels, meaning it's found in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And so this is an important enough lesson for us to think about that, again, is found in 3 of the 4 gospel accounts. The transfiguration of Jesus teaches us one major lesson. Today, Jesus is the final authority in all matters of faith. There is no other person, no other prophet or teacher of any kind that is greater than Jesus, that should cause us to contradict Jesus. Jesus is absolutely the one we follow. And so let's begin in Matthew 17, and we'll start with verses 1 and 2. Matthew 17. And the Bible says, after 6 days Jesus taketh Peter, James, and John his brother, and bringeth them up into a high mountain apart, and was transfigured before them. And his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was white as light. So here we learn that his countenance, his face, became glorious. It says it shined like the sun. And perhaps there's some parallels here to the Old Testament account of Moses. When Moses went up on Mount Sinai, it talks about his face shining. So maybe there's some purposeful parallelism here. But as we'll see in a moment here, Jesus is not compared to Moses, even though we do read about Moses here. The text says his face shined as the sun. Even his clothing changed. The appearance of his clothing was transformed. In Mark's account of this same thing, Mark 9, verse 3, it says his raiment, meaning his clothing, his raiment became shining, exceeding white as snow, as no fuller on earth can white them. Fuller is just an old word for someone who does laundry. It'd be like the dry cleaners today. So here Mark says his clothing became as white as snow. Is there anything whiter than just pure snow? Virgin snow? So everything about Jesus on this occasion was transformed before them. How he looked, how his actual appearance looked, his clothing was transformed. Now I'm reading from the King James, and the King James, as well as others, uses this word transfigured. He was transfigured before them. And the Greek term here is metamorphomai. And that's kind of a mouthful, but that is a word that we still use today. Those who study animals will use this word to describe a significant change or a transformation. It's used to describe amphibians. Right? If you're ever a kid and you go, this is something I did when I was a kid, I don't know about y'all, but go catch tadpoles, right? And it's amazing to kind of look up information and see how that little fish-looking thing can change into a frog. Well, that's a metamorphosis. And also with butterflies, right? I wonder how many people in the world know that this chunky, gooey bug transforms into a graceful butterfly. That's the same animal. It's the same creature. So again, people who study animals would say that caterpillar undergoes a metamorphosis. That's the word that they will use. And that comes from the Greek language. Again, that Greek word used in our New Testament. So again, the caterpillar becomes the moth, becomes the butterfly. And have you ever seen a caterpillar's chrysalis? I was raised in Oregon. I hope you don't hold that against me. The state of Oregon. Got a frog in my throat. Talking about frogs. And anyways, in Oregon, there's the monarch butterfly. And I don't know I don't think we have them here in Georgia. I don't think I've seen them. Maybe, I'm not sure. But in Oregon, there's quite a few. And it's interesting that they are a butterfly that migrates. And so they go up and they're pretty easily seen if you're out walking on a summer day or a spring day. And I forget what grade I was in. I know it was elementary school. But one of the teachers actually ordered some, chrysalises, these little pods. And so what the caterpillar does, it eats and eats and eats, and it grows to the point where it's ready to change. And with those who become butterflies, what they do is bugs are very strange creatures, and there's all kind of wonderful things about nature. Their skeletons on the outside, which is pretty bizarre, right? And they shed their skin one final time, and when they do that, they form this hard outer layer where they're no longer soft and squishy, but they have that hard exoskeleton now in that chrysalis form. And again, a teacher of mine when I was in elementary school ordered a bunch of those. I guess you can order them from somewhere. They break open from that pod, and out comes, the butterfly. And again, it's a pretty amazing thing that creature can change that drastically. And again, I just want to share that with you because Peter, James, and John, they witnessed a transformation in Jesus. And again, it's this word metamorphosis that is used in the text. So this is a significant change, a change in something's fundamental nature. The Bible says very little about Jesus' appearance. It says next to nothing. It never tells us about the color of his eyes. It never tells us, how he cut his hair, how tall he was, how thin or, robust he was. Doesn't tell us anything like that. In fact, again, one of the few times that the Bible actually mentions his appearance, it says there's nothing special about the way he looked. Consider what the prophet Isaiah said, Isaiah 53, verse 2. He shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness, and when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. So comeliness is kind of old-fashioned word, means, it's not handsome or majestic, something along those lines. And it says there's no beauty that we should desire him. A lot of people today will look at someone who's in the movies or something. Oh, he's handsome, she's beautiful. And they're drawn to that person just because of how they look. And here Isaiah is saying regarding Christ, that's not how Christ would be. People would not be drawn to him simply by how he looks. He would look like a normal person for that time, an average man for that time. But again, what we're looking at here in Matthew 17, this was a special occasion where Jesus' appearance changed, and it was something that caught at least the three's attention because they were the only ones there, Peter, James, and John. And they were drawn to him by the way he looked. And so as he was in this transfigured state, the text tells us that Moses and Elijah appeared with him and spoke with him. Now Moses, of course, is the great lawgiver of Israel. Elijah was considered one of the greatest prophets of God, and it's these two men that appeared with Christ on this occasion when he was transfigured. Now, before we read verses 3 and 4, I think there's a quick side note here that's worth considering. This is a passage which indirectly teaches us there is life after death. When the gospel account of Matthew was written down, Moses and Elijah had been dead for centuries. They'd passed away a long time ago by the time Matthew's account was written down. And yet here we read about these two men appearing to Jesus on this occasion and speaking with him. And again, this is worth noting because there are people in the religious world, even people who claim that they believe in the Bible, who absolutely deny that there is life after death. And this is something that is implicitly taught here. Well, what on earth are Moses and Elijah doing here? Well, it's because they're still alive, right, in the next world, in the next life. And this is also a concept that is explicitly taught in other passages. If anyone's taking notes, I'd encourage you to jot down Luke 20, verses 27 and following. We're not going to turn there for time's sake, but that's that passage where Jesus said, God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And that means, yes, we pass on from this world, of course. Yes, we experience death, but every person continues to live. Death is not the end of human existence. And again, Jesus taught that explicitly in Luke 20 and also other passages as well. So let's read here. Matthew 17, verses 3 and 4 says, Behold, there appeared unto them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then answered Peter and said unto Jesus, Lord, if it be good for us to be here, if thou wilt, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for thee, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah. So, here Peter sees this, and I'm assuming he's just stunned by what he saw. And I'm not sure exactly what he meant by this. Let's build 3 tabernacles. right? One for each person. And when we look at Luke's account, Luke says specifically, Peter himself didn't know exactly why he was saying this. Right, Luke 9:33, if you look at the end, let's build 3 tabernacles, one for each of you. He said, and then it says, not knowing what he said. Right, so this is, I think, kind of comforting. It's a reminder that Peter and other people in the Bible, they were human just like we are. Sometimes, Peter especially, he would kind of blurt things out without thinking about what he would say. Have you ever done that? I've done that, a few times in my life, and then go back and think, why did I say that? That was not the best thing to say. Well, Peter did that sometimes. So again, he says, well, let's build 3 tabernacles, right? One for Moses, one for Elijah, one for Jesus. And the text says he said that not knowing what he said. Right? So again, I don't know why he'd say that. Maybe I was reading one commentary, and just as a suggestion, it said maybe he was trying to be hospitable. Right? Here's these special guests, these kind of guests of honor, and he wanted to show something special for them and be hospitable. That's a kind way of looking at it for Peter. Again, it was just something he said. And we can see that was kind of just ignored. Not any attention was given to this comment. And we keep reading here. We see that a cloud begins to come and envelop this scene. Right? We have the 3 apostles, and then we have Jesus and these 2 prominent men, and a cloud comes in and overshadows them. Picking up with verse 5, it says, while he yet spake, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and behold, a voice out of the cloud which said, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him. And when the disciples heard it, they fell on their face and were sore afraid. And Jesus came and touched them and said, arise, and be not afraid. And when they had lifted up their eyes, they saw no man save Jesus only. So, again, what we're reading here, a cloud overshadowed them, a cloud enveloped them. And in the Bible, a cloud often indicates, not always, but it often indicates, especially in the Old Testament, often indicates the presence of God. And I'd say that is the case here because we also have this voice coming from heaven, clearly the voice of God the Father. And so everything that was happening here, Jesus being transfigured, these very important figures appearing, Moses and Elijah, and now this cloud overshadowing them and this voice from the cloud, this stirred up strong emotions in Peter, James, and John. And if you look at verse 6, it says they became afraid. Again, they were so afraid they fell down to the ground. They put their face to the ground. The text says they were sore afraid. Different translation says they're terrified. And this is a reminder, it's no small thing to be in the presence of God. Some people speak of God like God's their buddy, God's their homeboy, God's their chill with God and all this kind of stuff. And I would say that's kind of inappropriate. Look at these men's response when they believe they are in the presence of God the Father. They fall to the ground afraid. It's an extremely, extremely serious thing to be in the presence of God, even fear-inducing to be in His presence. And on this occasion, again, this very unique occasion, what did God the Father say? Look at verse 5. Again, this voice, it says this voice out of a cloud, which said, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him. And this is significant because of who Jesus is with at this time. Right? He says, hear him, singular. He doesn't say, well, hear them. Here's these important men. Hear them. He says, hear him. He singles out Christ and says, hear him. So again, in this passage, we find Moses. Again, I'd say other than Jesus Christ, probably the most important person in the Bible. If not, again, one of the most important. So Moses, the lawgiver. In this passage, we also read about Elijah, a highly respected prophet of God. And we, of course, read about Jesus here. And regarding the small group of three, the Father singles out the Son and says, "Hear him. Hear my Son." And this calls to mind, at least my mind, what is stated at the beginning of the book of Hebrews. The book begins with these words: "God, who at sundry times and in diverse manners spake in time past unto the fathers by the prophets, hath in these last days spoken to us by his Son, whom he hath appointed heir of all things, by whom also he made the worlds." And so in various times throughout history, in many ways, God made his will known through certain individuals, through prophets and the like. Moses, of course, was a prophet, and Elijah and others. Elijah was a great prophet. But in these last days, in this final dispensation, the age of Christianity, God has spoken to us by his Son. Again, a son regarding God, right? The Son of God, he's much more than a prophet. You know, as important as a prophet was, a man like Moses and Elijah. God has spoken us by his own Son. Certainly there's much we can learn and appreciate from Moses, right? This passage in no way is saying, we should never look at the law of Moses. We should never look at the prophets. They're evil today or anything like that. It's not saying anything like that. It's simply saying regarding everything that God has revealed in the age we now live in, Jesus is the most important. Christ is the authority all people are called to follow today. And again, I think this point is emphasized after this transfiguration comes to its end. Right? They fall to the ground, they're afraid, they after they hear this voice, the cloud's gone, and they look up. Right? Jesus touched them, they look up. Moses and Elijah are gone. The cloud's gone. Jesus looks normal, like he typically did. It says there was Jesus alone. Right? Jesus alone after God said, "Hear him. This is my beloved Son, hear him." The Transfiguration reminds us of a crucial part of the Christian religion. Today, Jesus is the final authority in all matters of faith. God tells us to hear his Son, Jesus Christ, not Moses nor Elijah. There's a lot of confusion and chaos in the religious world today. Even those who claim to be Christians will sometimes follow the teachings of Moses instead of following the teachings of Jesus. And making a proper distinction, a proper division between the Old Testament and the New Testament is not difficult. Some people will try to muddy the waters and make things confusing, when I think they really are not that confusing. Right? Here's the answer in Matthew 17. We're told to listen to Jesus. Now, if anything found in the law of Moses, if it's not repeated in some way in the New Testament, or if a certain practice in the law of Moses, like sacrificing animals, for example, if a certain practice is not in harmony with New Testament teaching, then you can know that is not something you are obligated to believe and follow today. We are obligated to trust in the teachings of Jesus Christ. Right, I think a good example of what I'm talking about here would be the Ten Commandments. There's a lot of people who get up in arms when you tell them we're not under the Old Testament. And they'll say, well, what about 10 Commandments? We're not under the 10 Commandments. And they'll be quick to dismiss you, say you don't believe in the Bible, things like that. Well, the thing is, 9 of those 10 Commandments, as I mentioned, are repeated in some fashion in the New Testament. The one commandment that's not repeated is the keeping of the Sabbath. And again, as I mentioned, if it's not repeated in some fashion or somehow incompatible with New Testament teaching, then we can know that's not something we're bound to follow today. Again, we look at the example Christians met on Sunday, not on the Sabbath or Saturday. They worship God on Sunday. There are passages which say we're not obligated to keep Sabbaths and observe Sabbaths and make judgments regarding Sabbaths and so on. So it's very clear from the New Testament side of things, that's a teaching that we are not bound to follow today. Again, we ought to follow, the specifics of the New Testament. After the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, Peter said the following about Jesus. And this is found in Acts 4, verse 12. Neither is there salvation in any other, for there is none other name under heaven given among men whereby we must be saved. I mean, what a strong statement that is, coming from a man raised in the Jewish faith, speaking to his fellow Jews. He doesn't say we're saved by following Moses, we're saved by following the Torah and the Old Testament. He says we're saved today by trusting in the name of Jesus Christ. And so let's trust in his name. The Father says he is the one we must hear. And so if there's anyone tonight who's not yet dedicated himself or herself to following Christ, again, I would plead with you just to receive what we've studied tonight. Hear him. Hear the teachings of Christ. Hear the teachings of his inspired apostles and trust in him. And if you're willing to do that, they both teach that you are to ultimately put Christ on in baptism, and that's when you begin your journey as a Christian. And if there's anyone who's not done that tonight, we can aid you in doing that. And if there's anyone who's subject to the invitation, please let us know by coming forward as we stand and as we sing.